Right then folks, welcome back to the channel. Today's topic of conversation is aquaplaning. Now, as you can see, the roads are pretty wet here in Scotland at the moment. It's that time of year, we're at the end of October, when the roads are pretty wet and can be a little bit slippery. So today's conversation, aquaplaning, skidding in the wet, what can you do about it, things to think about, things to avoid. Stay tuned. So yes indeed folks, thinking about aquaplaning today and also just traction in general in the wet. So aquaplaning, how can you avoid it? Well, one of the key things you need to do is ensuring that you have decent tread on your tyres. The minimum tread depth requirement in the UK is 1mm, but would I take my tyres to 1mm? Certainly not. Making sure that you have enough tread on your tyres will ensure that the water gets dispersed properly, thus reducing the chances of having the problem of aquaplaning. A lot of people think tread is for grip, but it isn't. It is for dispersing that water, and if you don't have much tread, then you will definitely have problems with aquaplaning if you decide to ride in rainy conditions. So that's the first tip, ensuring that you have enough tread. What else can you do? Well, we need to think about things like manhole covers or any kind of metal works. In the dry they might not be too slippery, but once you get them wet, then they certainly are that little bit slippier. Now if you ride directly over a manhole cover, straight up and down, you're not leaned over, not aggressive on the throttle or the brakes, then you'll most likely be absolutely fine. But if you're accelerating quite harshly or braking quite harshly, if you're abrupt with the controls whilst on a slippery surface, that is when you will potentially have problems. Also, when you're leaned over, you're banked over going around a corner, if you go over any kind of metal works, then you may induce a skid and have an accident. So we want to be anticipating, planning as far ahead as we possibly can, not just for traffic but for that metal works. So as I'm riding along, I'm looking as far as I can see to see what is my safest path of travel. If there is a manhole cover or drain of any kind, then I'm going to make sure that I go around it if possible. And looking up and looking further ensures that it isn't a last minute swerve. All too often I see bikers who are not looking far enough ahead and they come to a manhole cover that is in their path and it's a last minute swerve because they were only looking around 50 feet ahead of the bike. So you want to try and look as far as you possibly can, examining your road conditions, picking your cleanest, safest path of travel. So what else can we think about when we're on the roads and when they're wet? Well, this white paint here, when it is wet it can be rather slippery, so potentially you could be having a problem. Say for instance, if we go for an overtake on one of these country roads, you might feel your tyres slipping just ever so slightly on that white paint. Now it depends again how much you're leaned over, how aggressive you are on the throttle as you go for the overtake. Things like that will have a factor in how the bike behaves. But as long as you are smooth on the controls folks, be smooth with the accelerator, be smooth with the brakes, be smooth with your steering inputs, then your bike will be absolutely fine, so long as you also have, in conjunction as we mentioned earlier, a good amount of tread on your tyres. Now what about when it actually comes to using the brakes? Well, ideally we want to distribute the braking 50-50 between the front brake and the rear brake, evenly dividing the braking pressure, but that will mean that it'll take a little bit longer, a little while longer to actually stop. Your braking distance will be approximately double than what it would be in the dry, because in the dry you're able to use a lot more front brake, whereas in the wet it's advisable to use a little bit less front brake but a little bit more rear. So as a rough guide for you folks, around 50-50 between front and rear if you're braking in rather wet conditions. Now thinking about traffic conditions and anticipation, again linking back to earlier on when we spoke about looking further ahead, if you're looking further ahead, eyes up, looking into the distance, you can decelerate or brake nice and early, nice and smoothly, as opposed to seeing things late and having to brake rather promptly. So a good way of avoiding any issues is by looking further, braking earlier and braking smoother. Also, how you use your clutch. If you're going to be harsh with the clutch, then and suddenly giving that power to the wheel, then you could potentially have issues. Whereas if you are smooth with that clutch, you're gradually feeding it out and easing it out when you're in the gear selector that you need, then you're gradually feeding power to that rear wheel, thus reducing the chances of even having any issues at all. So what are some of the other hazards that we need to be aware of when we're riding in the rain? Well, one thing is that when it first rains, it can be initially a little bit slippery. So just be cautious if you're out and it has just started raining, then it can potentially be a little bit slippy. And in particular, things you want to watch out for is any multicoloured looking liquids on the ground. So this could be petrol, diesel, oil, anything of that nature. So use your senses, use your eyes, but also use your nose. Sometimes you can smell it. So use all your senses while you're out on your motorcycle. If you accidentally do go through a patch of diesel or oil, just be very, very cautious because it might be on your tyre. If you're quite wise and sensible, you may carry an old rag around with you, so it might be an idea to pull over, stop and try and give your tyre a little wipe before you continue. If you've ever got fuel on your shoes when you're in a petrol station forecourt, you'll know how slippy it is on your feet. So thinking about that, do you really want that on those two very small contact patches of your motorcycle? Something else to think about, folks, is the leaves. Now this time of year the leaves are falling, and when they're wet they can again be a little bit slippery. But with all this in mind, folks, this is not to put you off riding in the rain. Riding in the rain does not need to be a terrifying experience. I am currently riding in very wet conditions, it is raining, and I am not tense, I'm relaxed. So that would be my other tip for you folks, is try and relax when you're on your motorcycle. If you're tense and gripping for dear life, then it's going to affect the steering inputs. It's going to affect how you use the throttle, the brakes, the clutch. So try and relax your body, relax your arms, relax your hands, look as far as you can see, taking in the information nice and early, so then you can relax and just ride as you normally would. Sensibly, hopefully. The best thing to do, folks, I know it sounds to some of you maybe a little bit daunting, but is to go and expose yourself to these elements. Don't shy away from them. I've met a few riders that say that they never ever come out in the rain, and I'm thinking, well, that's a rather strange comment to make, because if you're out riding, especially in countries like this one where the rain can come on at any moment, then what are you going to do when it rains? Are you going to find a local hotel and pull up and stop for the night until the sun comes back out? Well, quite clearly not. So why not practice? Even if you go out for 20-30 minutes, go out and just practice riding in the rain. Practice being smooth with the throttle, with the brakes, with the clutch. And it doesn't need to be a scary experience that you shy away from. Now obviously it has its downsides. Your motorcycle will probably get rather messy, rather mucky, and you're probably going to have to give it a clean when you get back. But motorcycles are designed to be ridden, folks. So get out in all weathers, unless it's snow or ice, wouldn't really recommend that. But in rainy conditions there's no need to fear the rain. Especially with a lot of modern motorcycle tyres, they are a lot better than they used to be. Now the only thing to be aware of is if you are maybe riding a cruiser styled motorcycle with rather thick tyres, very thick rubber, they're not as good as say something like this in the wet conditions. So just be aware if you're riding something like that it may take longer to get any heat into the tyres, and they're just not overall designed as well as bikes like this to cope with wet conditions. Oh, I've got a lovely pheasant in the road. Come on, buddy. Come on. Don't you double back. And there's two of them. Don't you dare. Now aquaplaning is less likely to happen on a motorcycle in comparison to a car due to the profile, the shape of the tyre. Okay, so if you think about a motorcycle tyre, it's more of an oval shape and a thinner tyre, so it's actually a lot better at cutting through the water. Whereas a car tyre or a van, something of that nature, the tyre tends to be a lot flatter profile. So that is why they have a larger number for a minimum tread depth. In the UK it's 1.6 millimeters for cars and only 1 millimeter for motorcycles, and that's the reason why. It's because cars and vans, they are more likely to aquaplane than a motorcycle due to that shape of the tyre and how much tyre is actually in contact with the road. So your motorcycle is a lot less likely to aquaplane, but there are things that you can do to help yourself. Okay, so just a quick recap, make sure you've got good tread on your motorcycle tyres. Okay, so keep an eye on that. Make sure you're riding smoothly, not abrupt with the controls. Look far ahead so that if you need to decelerate or brake, that you're doing it nice and early, nice and smoothly. If you can, avoid any metal works. Be careful when you're going over railway lines, manhole covers, tram lines, that kind of thing. Just be cautious if you're riding over white paint, that can tend to be a little bit slippery as well. But just generally try and relax and get used to being out in the rain. Get out there, practice, and you will find it's actually not as bad as you think. Hopefully that video has been helpful to you folks. You take care, ride safe, keep it rubber side down, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.